Hi everyone, before we start, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so YouTube keeps showing you more content like this. Also, let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, let's begin. In a quiet Amarillo neighborhood where the streets sit low and flat against the plains and the wind smells faintly of dust and fertilizer, I learned that terror can dress up as something ordinary and stand on your lawn waving to you. You won't. Believe me, the first time I tell you he was mowing at midnight. Because you'll think of noise, ordinances, and sensible folks who work in the morning. But he did. The first night I heard the engine, I was up late sorting drywall screws into a coffee tin in my garage because I had been putting off fixing the laundry room shelf for so long that guilt finally caught up with me. I had the door cracked and the June heat pressed in and stuck to my arms. The engine's sound rolled into the garage like a low animal pacing the property line. It didn't roar, it purred. It purred in a way small engines rarely do. A smooth, unwavering tone that made the cicadas fall quiet for a moment. As if they wanted to listen, I stepped out into the driveway with a handful of screws still in my palm saw the lights first. Two old bulbs wired onto the front of a riding mower, yellow as nicotine stains, moving in perfect lines across Mr. Halford's yard. My wife, Mara, had warned me about minding neighbors' business when we moved. To Polk Street, said small towns and small cities have long memories. I told her Amarillo wasn't small, and folks didn't care what you did if you weren't setting fires or letting your dog dig up their flower beds. Watching him under the weak glow of those bulbs, I knew she was right, and I was lying to myself. People notice everything in a place like this. We just pretend we don't. He wore a wide hat and a denim shirt that hung like it had once fit a heavier man. I could not see his face. He rode the mower with a straight back, slow as a funeral procession. And when he reached the edge of the yard, he turned with the kind of care that suggested he had measured the corner and set a boundary there that no one else could see. The grass fell in clean lines. The smell drifted over the street, sweet and damp. And underneath it, a faint metallic scent that reminded me of licking a cut lip when I was a kid. I watched long enough to feel rude, and then went back inside and told Mara that the neighbor was mowing at midnight. She said, without looking up from her book, that some people liked the cool air. I didn't tell her the air was still warm and the sweat ran down the groove in my spine like a bead on fishing line. I didn't tell her about the metallic smell either, because it sounded foolish, already forming in my mouth. He did it again the next night. And the next, I timed him. The mower coughed to life at exactly 12, not 11:58, not 12:03, 12 on the dot. The first few nights I told myself this was a shift worker's compromise with the sun. The second week, when the temperature stayed well above 90, even after dark and the asphalt bred heat like a living thing, I started to look at the clock around 11:45 whether I wanted to or not. Our little rental had a sliver of a front porch. I sat there in a lawn chair and pretended to drink beer while I listened for the choke of the engine. It came, and the mower rolled, and Halford traced his lines with a patience that felt less like patience and more like obedience. Obedience to what? I wasn't ready to say. People noticed. Mrs. Avery from 2 houses down posted an angry paragraph on the neighborhood Facebook group that she later deleted after someone called her a busybody. The kid who skateboarded past our house every afternoon started to detour across the street to give the mower a wide berth when it sat parked by the fence in daylight. The pastor from the church at the corner waved when he drove by and did not stop. If anyone asked Halford about it, I never saw. He was a man built for nods and short greetings. You could put your hand up to him at the mailbox and he would lift his in return. And the whole encounter would feel like you had participated in a ceremony neither of you understood. The third week we had a wind that came from nowhere and bent the crepe myrtles like someone's thumb pressed hard against a forearm. Dust lifted off the open lots and smeared the moon. I thought he would skip the mowing. If I could have chosen a night for him not to appear, it was that one. Because I had begun to learn something about his presence. It didn't matter that he was just a man on a machine. When he was out there, the street belonged to him and to the yellow lights and to the humming blade that never rattled against a stone or twig. I watched anyway. 12 struck. The house groaned under a gust. The gutter clattered and the mower started. The lights drifted through the dust-like eyes underwater. He rode with his back straight. The dust gathered on his hat and ran down his shoulders as grit. He never broke the line. When the wind finally fell away, he cut the last pass and turned the mower toward the backyard. I couldn't see him anymore. But the engine idled for a long minute beyond the fence, as if reluctant to die. That was the night the smell changed. It wasn't only the penny tang anymore. It was rain on hot iron that had never seen water. It was the smell of a tool left out in weather and taken up again. It moved across the street and found my throat and sat there like a hand. I'm not superstitious. I grew up in Borgar, with refinery lights on the horizon, and men who could not afford superstition between shifts. I work at a lumber yard. I know the weight of a 2x12, the sound a board makes when it cracks along a knot, the way an old nail looks after it has spent years inside treated pine. But I have always had a watcher's streak, the kind that makes you stand at a window 5 minutes longer than you need to because something invisible is tugging at you. That streak got me up at 12:07 3 nights later when the mower did not start. I stood in the dark kitchen and listened to the drywall tick and the refrigerator buzz. No engine, no lights. I should have felt relieved. I felt left out, cracked. The back door and stepped onto the stoop. The night had that wide, empty sound the panhandle does when the wind takes a breath. Our yard had not been mowed in a week and smelled faintly swampy and tired. I turned toward Halford's place, and the mower started in the backyard, not the front. The sound came low and smooth, exactly as always, and the blade took a long pass along the fence. The lights rose as if someone had steered up a slope I could not see. Then an odd thing happened. You will tell me mowers do this, that maybe hydraulic lines hold a pressure and release, but I know what I saw. The mower's seat shifted as if someone had just climbed onto it. The engine note brightened. The machine eased forward. No one was there. I stood dumb because the brain folds in on itself when it finds the simplest thing missing. You can watch a movie about a ghost for 90 minutes and be fine. But stand in your own backyard and watch an empty mower draw a perfect line, and you are back to being a child who has misunderstood the rules of your own house. The mower cut a second line. It paused when it reached the end, backed neatly, turned, and began a third. The lines were so straight they made me sick. My knees went loose. I leaned against the doorframe and did not call for Mara. I did not want the thing to know there were two of us. It never looked at me, which is absurd to say, but I wanted it to look. I wanted the machine to tip a fraction as if weight had shifted and to swing the lights at my eyes. It did not. When it finished the invisible back lawn, the engine fell to idle. The seat dented as if someone had stood. The machine rolled slowly by itself toward the side gate and stopped. I closed the door. I locked the door. I imagined telling the police that a mower had moved without a man on it and felt the embarrassment scorch the back of my neck. I did not sleep. I listened to the silence, and then I listened to what lay under the silence, the hum that is always there if you wait. It is the sound of the house and the sound of your own heart, and it is the sound of something patient. Mara did not notice any of it. That was another lesson. Dread is a solitary food. It feeds one person at a time, and the person it chooses cannot share the bite without looking like a fool. I tried twice. The first time I said the mower was strange. She said people are strange. The second time I said the mower had moved by itself. She put a hand on my cheek and told me to try too. Sleep, because the heat makes the mind spin. When I kept waking up at midnight, she bought me a fan that made white noise and said it would help. 2 mornings later, I walked to the mailbox and found Halford already there. He had the hat on and the denim shirt, and his hands, which were long and dry, held a stack of coupons from the hardware store. He looked at them as if they were instructions, written in a language he had not quite learned. I said good morning. He looked up. The brim shaded his eyes, but I saw the whites. They were not yellow like some heavy drinkers get, and they were not bloodshot. They were very clean and very bright, and very hard. The pupils were pinched like someone had photographed the sun and then cut out the darkest parts. He smiled, but the way people smile when you hold a door for them and they know the correct response. He said, my name. He should not have known my name. We had never been introduced. He said it in a way that made it sound like a word he had turned over in his mouth a few times before saying it out loud. You get a feeling sometimes standing in front of a person that you are standing in front of a room. I felt that then. I asked him if he was doing midnight mowing to beat the heat. He said yes. He said it flat, like he was repeating a line someone had given him. I told him engines were loud, but I didn't mind. He cocked his head as though the word loud had a new meaning and he was deciding where to put it. He said he appreciated that. He walked away. Before he reached his door, he turned back and looked at the yards on either side of his, one of them ours. The other, the Darden place that had been empty since March. He looked with interest. That is the most accurate word. He looked like a carpenter looks at a clean board before laying a mark on it. A storm came. Not the big sort that rolls off the caprock with a black shelf cloud like a city wall, but a messy afternoon downpour that sinks the bar ditch and then quits. It stopped. At 7, the mosquitoes rose. The heat stayed. I told myself I would not look at midnight. At 11:56, I was already on the porch with a bottle of beer sweating in my hand. When the mower started, it did not start in his yard or his backyard. It started somewhere behind the Darden house. The lights did not appear. I could hear the engine. It moved along the invisible fence line with the same patient pace. I knew every dog on this block and which ones barked at shadows and none barked. The sound crossed behind 3 houses, and the blade made no clack where it should have met the low concrete footers that some folks buried at the back of their lots. The hair along my forearms lifted. The sound quieted and drifted forward. Lights found the corner of the Darden yard and drew a straight yellow line along the grass. The machine passed the Darden front window. The house had been empty since a divorce and a quiet sale that left a for-lease sign staked in the dry bed of the flower box. The sign leaned. The mower passed the sign without nudging it. The grass fell in such a perfect strip that it looked like a photograph of grass. Then it turned toward my side of the street. I stepped back onto my porch as if distance could hold shape against nonsense. The machine crossed the road. The lights swung. It came to rest at the edge of our yard and paused. I did not breathe. The engine idled. It took a pass along our curb and then another, careful as a barber at a funeral parlor shaving a man he did not know. I watched my own lawn change into a version of itself I did not recognize. It looked like a carpet pulled, tight by a hand, with no pity for wrinkles. The mower reached the place where my sprinkler line pokes up and did not hiccup. It lifted, passed, and set down again the way an airplane kisses a runway. It finished and waited. The engine's note changed. It was a request. That is not rational. But I felt it. It wanted to turn into my driveway. It wanted to climb the slope and take the narrow strip between the concrete and the porch. I shook my head without meaning to. The lights did not look at me because lights cannot look, but I felt noticed, which is a worse and truer thing. The machine backed gently, turned, and crossed toward Halford's house. It disappeared along his side yard and fell quiet. The silence it left behind was bigger than the street. I stopped sleeping well. I dreamed once that the mower had a shadow, taller than the house, and that the shadow watched me through my bedroom wall with no eyes at all. I woke with my heart sprinting like a rabbit and the fan pushing warm air across my face. In the morning, I told myself that I had grown dramatic and I should not have that third beer. I ate cereal with my head down and told Mara I would fix the shelf today. She kissed my cheek in a way that said she heard me and did not believe me, and wished I would anyway. When I went to the garage, I found the riding mower parked in front of the workbench. Not mine. I do not own a riding mower. It was there. The yellow bulbs stared at me like tired teeth. The smell hit me hard enough to make my eyes water. It was sweet, wet grass. It was pennies. It was the smell of a new shovel dug into old soil. I stumbled backward into a rake and knocked it against the water heater. The clatter sent me running for the door. My thumb slipped on the lock. When I looked back through the window set in the door, the garage was empty. My hands shook for a long time after that. I told myself I had imagined it. I told myself a brain under stress will make a picture and hang it in front of your eyes and you will swear it was there. I needed a witness. People will say I should have called someone. People who have never felt foolish in their own kitchen think the phone will save them. I asked my friend Chris to come over for a beer. He works with me at the yard and was the best man at our wedding 10 years ago, when we were both skinnier and the wind didn't bother our knees. He came at 10:30 and we sat in the back with the porch light off to keep the bugs from attaching themselves to our ankles. I did not tell him what to expect, because if I said it and nothing happened, I would have to see my words fall to the ground and split. We were talking about a load of warped cedar that had come in from a supplier with a new driver who didn't strap his stacks tight enough. Then the engine started. Chris stopped mid-complaint about inventory. He looked at me and smiled with half his mouth like a man enjoys a small coincidence. I said, "Listen." He nodded and said he heard it. The engine note was smooth and steady and climbed toward the Darden yard. The lights appeared. Chris said, "Someone's got a late chore," and then the mower took a pass where there is no lawn. He did not speak for 3 heartbeats. He said, "Okay, that is weird." He stood and moved to the railing. The mower showed itself above the low hedge that divides the Darden property from ours and tracked a perfect line along a border that has never been measured by man. Chris said, "Where is the guy?" The mower turned and took another pass. I said, "Watch the seat." We watched the seat. It pressed. It lifted. It pressed again. Chris said a bad word and then said it again. The mower circled around the hedge and came toward our fence. It slowed at the corner like it knew the post had sunk a hair and did not want to clip it. It paused. The engine purred happy. Chris said, "It sees us." Then he looked at me and laughed because it sounded like the punchline to a joke we did not want. The mower rolled along the fence. Halfway down, it stopped again. It idled. It pressed forward as if testing the boards for a gap. Chris whispered, "Don't." It backed away and crossed toward Halford's side. The lights swung once across us. I don't know whether they hit our faces or the darkness filled our faces with its own light. The mower went home. Chris did not laugh during the second beer. He kept the can on his knee with his hand around it like he needed the weight. He said, "I think I saw a guy behind the hedge at the start." I said I have seen him when the mower is mowing. He stands where the lights can't reach. He wears the hat. He doesn't hold the wheel. Chris said, "You are screwing with me?" I said no. He asked me if I had ever touched the mower. I said no. He asked if I had ever called anyone. I shook my head. He told me to film it. I said I didn't want a copy of it inside my phone where I keep pictures of my wife. He looked at the grass and said it looks fake. I told him it always looks like that after days went by. I went to work and hauled boards and talked about baseball with men who had kids on interleague teams. The world stayed normal in that loud, splinter-prone, sun-blasted way it has. And then night would come and wrap my street in a thin black coat, and at midnight the coat would tighten. The mower obeyed its clock, worked in front when there was moon and in back when there was not. It began to hop properties like a polite burglar. The lawns it crossed afterward looked better. Better is not the right word. Tighter, truer, corrected, the way a math teacher draws a clean line through a sloppy numeral. I found myself avoiding walking on the grass in the morning just because I did not want to leave a record of my foot. I walked to my truck along the driveway and stepped from concrete to concrete like a boy who thinks the cracks will swallow him. I tried to talk to Halford once more. The mailbox again. I said that was a hell of a mower. He said, "Thank you." I said I had never heard an engine run so smooth. He said he took good care of it. His eyes did not move away from mine and did not move toward mine. They looked at something level with my ear. I asked where he got it. He said it had been in the family. He might as well have said it had grown out of the ground. I told him I could hear it sometimes. He said he hoped that was not a problem. I said no, and then my mouth betrayed me, and I said I have seen it move alone. A man with a hat and a denim shirt has many choices at a sentence like that. He can laugh. He can get angry. He can step away. He did none. He asked me if I slept. Well, it was a question that had pockets, and they all held the same answer. I said I slept fine. He tilted his head like a dog who has heard a whistle only he recognizes, then turned and went back to his front door. On the 10th of July, the power went out just after dinner. A heavy hum rolled across the neighborhood first, as though a plane had dipped low over the roofs, and then the lights went dark and the air conditioner sighed as it died. The sky held on to the last scratch of daylight and then let it go. People came out onto porches. We listened for sirens and heard none. The wind lay still. I told Mara we should open the bedroom windows, and she said she'd rather sit on the porch and fan herself than invite the mosquitoes in. We played a game of cards and laughed at ourselves for losing count. Somewhere around 11:30, I realized I had not thought of the mower for hours. Somewhere around 11:50, I thought of nothing else. The street wore a night that felt heavier without the grid. 12 came. The mower started. No other sounds stood up to meet it because there were no other sounds left. It glided along the Darden property and then ours. Without any power, the lights it wore burned as bright as ever. You can say they were battery operated. Fine, say that. They did not dim. They did not flicker. They did not paint the grass. Revealed the grass to itself. Mara stood with me. I had not asked her to. She had a hand on my forearm, and it tightened when the mower paused near the porch. She said, "Who is driving that?" I said, "No one." I expected her to laugh because people laugh when the world tilts, but she did not. She asked me if this was a prank. I shook my head. The mower eased toward the steps and then turned with a grace that made the hairs behind my ears lift. It left. When it finished at Halford's, it did not shut off. It crossed the street toward the Avery house where the grass had grown thick because her husband's knee was bad again. It cut a perfect panel in front of her shrubs and then moved to the side yard like it knew the shape of that property better than the woman who paid taxes on it. Mara said, "I don't like that." She said it with a voice I had not heard since the day she called me from her sister's place when the baby. We had tried to have decided not to stay. It was the voice a person uses when the body is making a decision. Without them, the power came back at 2. I stood at the window long after it did. I watched our yard stand flat and obedient and felt something inside me bend in the same direction. At dawn, I went out with a tape measure and knelt in the dew. I measured 6 spots. The grass was exactly 1 3/8 inches high. I moved to another area. The same. I crossed to the garden yard and knelt and put the tape down beside an old sprinkler head that had not worked for months. The same. I looked up and found Halford standing at his kitchen window with the blind 2 inches raised. He was watching me the way a person watches a level bubble settle between lines. I lifted a hand, and because I had no other idea what to do, I gave him a small, unfunny thumbs up. He lowered the blind without a sound. After that, I tried to interfere. I put a small cement paver on the strip by the curb to see what would happen when the mower reached it. At midnight, it did not reach. It altered its line a 1/4 inch and kept going, and then corrected a 1/4 inch back when the paver lay behind. I stuck a broom handle through our chain-link gate so it would not swing open. At midnight, the latch lifted by itself, and the handle slid aside as if a hand had guided it. I turned on a hose and let water run across the edge of the lawn until a thin stream pooled on the sidewalk. At midnight, the mower paused as if accepting an apology and then proceeded, and the blades left a spray like confetti. Do not tell me to leave. Not yet. There are reasons people stay inside wrong things. Some are money, some are pride. Some are the stubbornness that grows like scar tissue around fear. I told myself I would not be chased from a modest rental on a modest street in a modest city by a man and a machine. I told myself I would find the engine, and I would find the fuel, and I would find the switch that made the lights burn. I told myself if I could touch the switch and feel a plastic nub under my finger, then the world would settle. I waited for a night when I had the courage. It came without asking my permission after a day when every board I lifted felt heavier than its weight, and I could not stop thinking of how precise a cut has to be to make 2 unlikely pieces meet at 12:14. The mower finished its last pass and idled behind Halford's house. He had long ago stopped pretending to be the one to shut it off. The engine purred. I went through my gate and crossed the alley. I moved through the pale glow that bleeds out of windows at night and stuck to fences like fog. I stepped into his backyard. The mower sat in the center of the grass, facing the kitchen. The lights were on inside. The blinds were all drawn. The mower's lights burned, weak and steady. The seat had a shallow dent at the center, like a heavy cat had dozed there. The engine idled. It sounded like a satisfied throat. I told myself it was a piece of metal. I told myself to put my hand on the key. I rounded to the front and leaned in. There was no key. The switch box was old and had a place for one, a neat little metal circle, and nothing occupied it. The plastic was smooth, worn to silk by fingers that had never belonged to the man I knew. The ignition's wires disappeared into a braided sleeve that ran under the deck and into the dark belly where belts and pulleys and a blade should live. I reached for the sleeve. I pinched it the way you pinch a sleeping snake when you have convinced yourself it is not alive. It was warm. It pulsed. I jerked back so hard I fell onto my ass and kicked the deck with my heel. The engine note faltered. It wasn't just my imagination, because the night changed around the mower the way sound changes. Inside a church, when the congregation lifts its head. I started to stand, and the machine inched forward. I froze. I was close enough to see scuffs on the paint from years of boots. I was close enough to smell that smell like a field dressed with clippings and a Cohen press to the tongue. The machine inched again. The seat dipped and rose with no one touching it. Something about the dip made my stomach turn over, because it was not the easy bounce of springs. It was a body settling from one position to another, and the body was not shaped like mine. A light came on in the kitchen. Halford raised the blind 2 inches. His eyes were at the level of the gap like before. He did not look surprised to see me. He did not even look interested. He looked patient. I stood slowly so he could see I had nothing to hide and put my hands up in a pantomime of surrender that felt ridiculous and necessary. The mower idled and did not move. He lowered the blind. I backed away 3 steps with my hands still up, and when I turned to run, my legs failed the first time, and I went down on one knee, and the grass left a dark, wet mark on my jeans and smelled like fresh sweetness poured over steel. I woke Mara and told her we needed to take a weekend away. I did not say why. She asked if I had been drinking. I said not enough to make a story up. She said we could go to Palo Duro Canyon and rent one of the little cabins near the rim and hike if the heat didn't break our backs. We booked it. We left Friday after work. I looked back at Polka Street as we turned toward Ifredian felt the way a man feels who suspects his front door will not recognize him when he returns. The canyon gave us red walls and the kind of silence that is not silent at all, the kind that carries a rustle from a mile away to your ear like a secret. We ate fried pies from a place near Claude and laughed about how sugar can make even frightened people laugh. I slept one night through. The second night I woke at midnight, which would be habit if habit had teeth. The wind ran along the rim and pushed a wooden sign into a slow clack against its post. I listened for an engine where no engine should be and told myself a brain under strain will go looking for its jailer, even when free. We came home Sunday and the street looked like a photograph taken before we left. The only difference was small. Our yard looked better. The blade lines ran straighter than they ever had. The border by the flower bed had a perfect scallop that I had never seen. A new smell lay under the old. It reminded me of the little cemetery north of town where our son has a stone with no body under it. Just a name and 2 dates that squeezed together like they were embarrassed to take space. It was the smell of wet rock and flowers that have no scent. I glanced at the front step. A smear of green stained the edge where grass had been pushed a little past itself. On the smear, a shallow track had pressed down the grit the wind leaves there. The track looked like a bare foot that was not a foot. I did not step on the lawn after that. I crossed in the morning from stoop to driveway and from driveway to truck. I parked a little crooked at night so I could put my foot on the concrete without touching any blade at all. Mara rolled her eyes and once stepped off the porch into the grass while looking at me just to show the world still worked. Her foot left no mark. That week, the mower traveled farther. Heard it 3 doors down and then 5. A man at the end of the block named Alvarez came outside in his undershirt and yelled into the night, and the mower turned off. The next night, it went past his house without pausing. He put a for sale sign in his yard the following weekend. It didn't stay long. The sign was pulled up, and the mower strip rolled across the spot where the stake had been. You will say, kids. I will tell you, kids do not remove signs in that manner. They tilt them or steal them. This was different. The spot was corrected. That is the word I keep coming back to when I wake at 3 in the morning and my tongue feels like it is made of chalk. Corrected. If there is a flaw in your life that only you feel, a small listing in your foundation that troubles you when no one else is around, something will offer to fix it. It will fix it without asking you questions, and then it will look at what remains. The first thing the mower corrected was the grass. The second was the sound of the night. The third was the way my mind held its shape. I tried to go a day without thinking about it. I failed by 10 a.m. I tried to read without glancing up at the window. Every few minutes, as if noon had learned a new trick and moved. I failed by noon. I tried to go outside at dusk and listen to the neighbor's wind chimes without hearing a machine that was not yet awake but would be. I failed by dusk. You will say, I could have left. I could have. My wife could not. Her job was here, and so was the stone with our son's name, and so were the habits that root into you when you do not notice. So I stayed with her. The mower stayed. With me, I almost forgot the man. It is easy to forget the man because the machine steals the eye. But he was always there. He stood beyond the light. He favored the north side of his own house, between a crepe myrtle and a chain-link gate with a latch polished by no hand. He wore the hat. He kept his head down. Sometimes he would raise it and look at the sky as if searching for a star that had promised to meet him. I tried to catch him during the day. I rang his bell. He did not answer. I watched for him at the mailbox. He did not come. In the evenings, his kitchen light burned and a shadow moved behind the blind. But when I looked harder, the shadow did not match a man's shape. The shoulders were too narrow and too long. The head was too still for something attached by a neck. You will say, tricks of light. You will say, the mind loves monsters. It does. It also knows a stranger in its own mirror. On a Monday, when the heat finally broke and the sky went a quiet gray, a smell came from the Darden house. The property manager showed up in a white truck and went in. He came out and called someone, and walked to the curb holding the phone away from his face as if it smelled too. The mower started at noon. It had never started at noon. People came out and stood. The machine rolled along the Darden yard and then stopped at the front steps. An officer in a dark uniform arrived and stood beside his car and watched the mower, like he had been told to keep an eye on a dog that might bite. The property manager went to the officer and spoke and pointed. The officer nodded and put on gloves. He entered the house. He came out with his hand over his mouth in a way that made me turn away. They brought a van and took something away. No one said a word to me, and I did not ask for one. That night, the mower did not start at midnight. It started at 11:50. It crossed the Darden yard once, and then cut the strip along the curb until the blade hummed like a throat that has learned a song. In the morning, the rumors turned into simple facts that no one wanted to own. A vagrant had been living in the back room. He had not been alive for some time. The summer heat had made a work of him. No, he had not broken in. The key was behind the fuse panel where it always is in those old houses. Yes, someone should have checked sooner. No one did. If your mind wants a link and refuses to accept none, you do what I did and make one. The mower had moved there early. It had called them. It had corrected more than grass. I stopped pretending I was okay. I told Mara we should move. I said I could find a place out near bushland or canyon. That rent is rent and walls are walls. She looked at me for a long time and asked the question a person asks when they love you and your fear has pushed its hands against the glass between you. Are you leaving because of the mower? I said yes. She said we could. Then she said something I will never forgive fully and never forget. She said maybe it makes the night safer. She said she felt like the street was watched. She said the yards looked cared for, and that care is a kind of blessing. She put her hand over mine and squeezed and said maybe it gives people a feeling, like someone is taking care of the little things. I pulled my hand back and asked her to come outside at midnight and stand at the edge of the grass and tell me if the care felt like a blessing then. She would not. She is not a coward. She is something better and worse. She is a person who knows how to look away at the right time and live. I started to see the mower when it was not there. I would glance into the rearview mirror and catch the double yellow glow sliding along the street behind me when nothing followed. I would look down at my arms and find damp green flecks on my skin after standing at the sink and feel the urge to rinse them off quick before they sank in. I stood one afternoon in the lumberyard office and the printer hummed. And for a breath, the sound matched the engine's tone, and the air turned sweet and metallic at once, and I had to put my hands on the counter as if the room were a boat. I saw a doctor. He told me to sleep more and drink less. I told him I drank less and slept none. He put a hand on my shoulder and said I should try a different chair in the living room and stop watching late-night television. I didn't tell him we didn't have cable and the television never showed anything. I couldn't explain. On the first Friday in August, I came home late and the street felt too quiet. The heat had backed off enough to let the neighborhood breathe. And people were on porches. No one talked. Everyone looked at their yards without looking. That trick small places teach you. I parked and stepped onto the driveway. The concrete felt cold through the thin soles of my work boots. Our yard lay tight and clipped and proud, and the line by the curb had a shine to it like something polished with a cloth. I put my hand to my mouth and rubbed my lip because the old habit of tasting blood when there is none helps some men stop shaking. The mower started at 11:47. No one had seen it start earlier than that. It sounded eager. It crossed along the Levy place and then the Avery place and then the Darden place. And then it stopped dead in front of our house. The lights burned. The engine idled. It did not move. I had the sudden, sick idea that a dog gets when the thing. It has been running from turns and looks back. I told myself to go inside. I did not. I stepped down from the porch and stopped at the edge where the last board of the step meets the first blade of grass. The mower's engine deepened. It rolled. Forward, I did the stupid thing that makes men die, and I put my foot onto the lawn. It came at me, not quickly the way a man would rush in a fight. Quickly the way a decision is made and the world changes to match it. The machine covered the distance and stopped 12 inches from my shin, and I felt heat. The light lifted up my body and drew a shape on my chest. The seat dipped and rose. The deck shivered once, like a throat swallowing. I said, very quietly, "Go away." I said it not to the machine, said it to whatever had asked the machine to take care. The mower turned away and cut a narrow line along the flower bed, and then returned, and then cut another, and then sat and idled, and then shut off. The lights went dark. The night swelled around the silence until people on porches found their voices again. And the chime at the corner rang twice, and dogs across the neighborhood remembered how to bark. I stepped backward. Onto the concrete, did not notice my leg had bled where a blade of grass had cut it until I saw the swipe on the edge of the step. The cut was thin and perfect, and so straight it scared me more than if the mower had climbed my body and chewed. I did something that did not feel like me the next morning. I went to a pawn shop on Western Street and bought a used camcorder with a cracked flip screen and a battery that held a charge for 60 minutes. I set it on a tripod in the bedroom window behind the blinds and pointed it at our yard. I told myself I didn't ever have to look. I told myself the act of recording might change the thing into a version that obeyed the glass. At midnight, the mower did its work, and I lay with my eyes shut and counted to 2,000 and thought of nothing and everything. At 12:50, I rose and pressed play. The tape played a wide shot of a quiet yard. The camera saw less than my eye. There were no lights. There was only the one still grass and then the once cut grass. It did not show the between. I fast-forwarded and played again. The between did not appear. The tape showed nothing happening, and then the line drawn like chalk by a hand that never exists in the frame. I turned the camera off and hid it in the closet and stood inside the darkness among jackets we never wear, because Amarillo only remembers winter when you are not ready. And I put my face against the oldest coat and breathed wool and cedar, and I cried without sound, because what else is there to do when the proof you sought gives you less than a lie? When people go missing in a city like ours. The news gives you a clean rectangle of a face and a last scene in a font that tries to be kind. I bought groceries at the United Supermarkets on Georgia and saw a paper tacked to the corkboard near the entrance with a photograph of a young man who lived 3 blocks away. On Brennan Street. He had been missing 3 days. He worked nights. The last time anyone talked to him was midnight, the paper said, as if the word had any meaning left outside our block. I stared at the photograph long enough that I could feel the clerk's eyes on my back. And then I bought bread and milk and returned home and stood in the kitchen and did not open either. At 11:59, the mower started 2 blocks away. The sound came along Brennan first, then turned. I walked outside and sat on the step. I did not know whether I hoped to see nothing or everything. The machine appeared and passed, and the line it left sang. I thought of the missing man standing in his own yard under a streetlight with a phone at his ear, saying, "Sure, I'm right. Here," and having nothing left to say after. I am writing this because last night something happened that made the bottom edge of the world show. I woke before the engine. I went outside before the door knew I'd gone. The sky over the plains wore a thin skin of cloud, and the moon smeared against it like a wet thumb. The street lay quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator in our kitchen tick through the window behind me. At 12, the mower did not start. At 12:06, it did. The sound did not come from the Darden place, or the Avery place, or any human place. It rose from the gap in the alley, where the city never planted grass because the ground there is stubborn and keeps the memory of whatever it was before houses. The lights came on without bulbs to hold them and moved along the alley and turned. Into my backyard, the machine revealed itself where there is no space for a machine to be. It did not pass the gate. It did not break the fence. It was simply inside the yard facing my house. The engine fell to idle. The seat held its shallow dent. I knew what it was waiting for. I knew because of the way the night held, still like a room full of people when the groom is supposed to speak. The kitchen light came on. The blind lifted 2 inches. I looked through and saw Mara standing there in her sleep shirt with the color drained from her face by the cheap bulb. She was not looking at me. She was looking past my shoulder at the mower. Her mouth moved. I did not hear what she said. The mower edged forward until the deck touched the bottom step. The blade did not spin. The engine did not rise. The seats dip deepened and then rose as if a weight had shifted. The air leaned toward me. I turned. Halford stood by the crepe myrtle in his yard with his hat low and his shoulders still. He lifted a hand. It was not a wave. It was a test of the distance between us, the way a man sticks a measuring tape and draws it out. The wind rose and ran along Polk Street and brought with it the smell I have tried so many times to name and never will, the smell of something being set in order too late. The mower reversed slowly and turned away from the step and crossed the grass in a long arc that left a pale green bruise in its wake. It reached the fence and paused. The latch on the gate slid up by itself, and the gate opened. The mower left. The latch settled. The street waited. The engine faded. The night remembered how to be night. I went inside and found Mara at the sink, with both hands on the counter and her head bowed. I asked her what she had said. She told me she had asked it to leave. She said the words like a person trying to explain the taste of a fruit you have never seen. I asked if she had been awake long. She said she woke when it came into the yard. I did not ask how she knew it had entered. I put my hand on her back and felt heat through the thin cotton and the bones under it that had been mine to guard for a decade. She turned and put her face against my chest and said she did not want to live here anymore. We packed this morning. I am writing quickly with the blinds open because I hate them and always have. The truck is full. The bed holds more than the house can admit. We will drive east and then south, and maybe we will find a place where grass grows wrong in a different way. I wanted to leave a note under the mat for the next tenant that says be gone by July, but July is already here and the mower does not care whether you are warned. Before we locked the door, I walked once more to the edge of the step and looked at the yard. The lines are perfect. The border shines. There is a nick halfway down the third strip from the driveway where a blade caught a stone the size of a fingertip and swallowed it. The nick is shaped like a smile, made without joy. I went to the garage to fetch the last box. I had to step over. The crack where the slab lifted years ago, and no one ever fixed it because it only trips you once, and after that, you remember. The garage smelled faintly of oil and the ghosts of old projects. I bent for the box, and when I stood, the mower was there. I do not mean that it had arrived. I mean that the space it now occupied had never not been occupied by it, and I had only failed to notice the lights were not on. The seat was not dented. The engine did not run. It did not need to. I set the box down slow and said, "We are leaving." The air tasted like pennies. The sleeve around the ignition wires pulsed gently, like a throat that had learned how to breathe without lungs. Something inside the deck sighed. I reached toward the smooth ignition circle because a man cannot help but try a keyhole even when he has no key. Heat rose from the plastic into my fingertips and up my arm into my chest. The feeling was not fire. It was a memory stiffening. It was a hand laying me down inside a shape I once had and telling me to hold still. I heard the front door open and Mara call my name. I could not answer because the breath had not yet found the way back out. The mower leaned toward me. Seat dipped. A weight I cannot describe sat where a man sits and looked at me without eyes. I am riding this last part from the driveway with the box beside my foot and the truck engine idling because I refused to turn it off and give the night the satisfaction of a silence it can fill. The mower sits in the garage with its nose 12 inches from the threshold, like a dog who has learned where to stop. The street looks ordinary. The neighbors have their porch lights on and are pretending to watch the moths. The man in the hat is not at his window. The blind is all the way down. When we drive away, I know what I will see in the rearview mirror. I will see 2 yellow lights slide from the garage into the dark and draw a line along the street that will not be there when I turn my head. I will see the seat dip. I will hear the engine find the note my heart has been trying to match. We'll go, the mower will stay. The lawns will be perfect. And the next tenant will stand on the step with a key in hand and feel a correction pass through them like a blade. There is one more thing. Our son's name is on a stone north of town. And the grass there is always too long or too short because the city crews cannot spare the men to get it right every week. We stop sometimes with scissors and cut a square the size of a pillow because that is what we can do. On the way out of Amarillo, we will pass the turn that leads there. If the truck keeps going straight and I do not take it, it will not be because I forgot. It will be because I cannot decide whether I want to see the grass on that square cut to exactly 1 3/8 inches with a little shine along the border and a smell in the air like rain on iron and sweetness. If it is, I do not know. Whether I will be relieved or ruined. Mara just closed her door. She is watching me through the windshield. I'm going to put this notebook on the passenger seat and drive. The mower is quiet. The night is not. The street holds its breath the way a room does when everyone has agreed to pretend that the rules are still the rules. I can feel the engine of my truck in the bones of my hands. I can feel another engine beneath that one, under the city, under the hard pan, under the red dirt. Humming the line we will all learn in time. If you ever move to Polk Street and you hear mowing at midnight, you will tell yourself it is nothing. You will stand at your window and count to 10 and breathe. You will promise yourself that if you do not watch, it will not notice you. It will notice you anyway. It will correct your grass. It will adjust your night. If you are lucky, you will. Leave before it moves into your garage and breathes without lungs and weighs your name in the mouth of the man who never lifts his eyes. If you are unlucky, you will believe what my wife almost believed, that care is a blessing. You will learn what I have learned. Some care is a blade dressed like a kindness. Some blessings mow you level and call it love. In Odessa, where the wind smells like sun-baked dust and engine oil, and the streetlights throw pale cones that never quite touch the ground. There was a man who sat in a rocking chair every night at 2 in the morning. The chair was old, the kind with slats that had been rubbed smooth by years of hands, and a bottom stretched with sagging cane that had the faint shine of old sweat. He sat straight-backed, long legs planted wide, a thin blanket folded over his knees, even in the heat. He wore a white undershirt and a pearl snap shirt over it that he never buttoned, and a cap with a slanted brim that might have been blue once. His porch was 3 stairs above the yard and set back beneath a shallow roof. If you were coming up the block from the corner with the tire shop, you might not notice him at first. You might think it was a trick of the light, an arrangement of chair and shadows that looked like a man. But if you lived across the street, as I did, you could not ignore him because he faced my house directly. He faced my bedroom window. We moved to that stretch of Newcomb Street in late March, when the mesquite trees still wore winter like a memory and the morning air had that thin clarity West Texas gets before summer settles like a lid. My second floor bedroom window looked over his porch. The real estate agent had called it a master suite, as if a small extra closet had conjured nobility out of taped drywall. I slept light. I always have. That first morning, I woke at 2 to the wind grinding grit along the curb and a hush in the house that felt like it belonged to someone else. I looked toward the window because I had not yet trained myself not to, and I saw the glow of the streetlight. Reflected on the man's undershirt, I saw the chair move back and forward once, an inch. I lay very still and watched. I could feel my pulse at my throat, a slow knock against bone. He did not smoke, he did not drink, he did not lift a hand to swat at bugs. He sat and watched my window until 3, when he set the blanket aside, rose with care, and stepped into his house. I counted the seconds to sleep and realized, I had counted all the way to daybreak. On the second night, I told myself I would not. Look, I lay on my side with the window shade drawn to shoulder height, and I stared at the wall and recited the names of tools in my head: flathead, Phillips, Allen, Torx, level, plumb bob. Chalk line. The wind shifted. Something in the house creaked in that rehearsed way houses do when they are telling you they are still here. I rolled onto my back and looked at the window because discipline is no match for curiosity inside a dark room. He was there, deeper inside the shadow than the light. But the white undershirt gave him away, and the slow rhythm of the rocker gave him the weight of a person. I held still long enough for my arms to tingle, and then I slid out of bed like a man slipping from under a dog that has fallen asleep on his legs. I went downstairs and out onto my porch and stood behind the banister. The night air had cooled enough to sting my bare feet. I raised a hand and waved like a neighbor who has convinced himself of his own normalcy. He did not return the wave. He did not shift at all. The chair did. Back an inch, forward an inch, a rhythm as patient as an ant. Old song you do not like but cannot forget. His head remained angled toward my window as if the porch railing and the dark had made me invisible. I stood there 20 seconds and then 2 minutes, and then I went back inside because going inside felt more brave than staying out there pretending. I did not mind. My sister called the third day to ask how the move had gone and whether the house still smelled like other people's lives. I told her the place would never lose the odor of old couch foam and lemon cleaner, that I had set traps for the silverfish and the little beige spiders that sprint along baseboards, that the faucet in the downstairs bath dripped like a metronome. I did not tell her about the man. My sister loves to worry and would have expressed it in a way that would have given shape to something I did not yet want named. Said, the neighbors were quiet. Said it 3 times without knowing I had repeated myself. That night I drew the shade before bed the whole way, so the room settled into a close dark where the edges of the furniture softened and I could lie still and tell myself the world stopped at the wall. At 2, the room brightened by a shade. The way a night brightens when a cloud moves off a reluctant moon. The light found a gap where the shade met the trim and slid across the wall like a thin knife scraping a plate. I turned my face to the pillow and held it there until the fabric warmed under my breath and began to smell. Like linen and laundry soap, and a little bit like a person being quiet for too long. At 3, the light thinned and the house relaxed. I rolled onto my back and stared at the ceiling fan blades, not moving. I listened to the refrigerator cycle. I slept poorly and woke with a headache and a new understanding that a man can be watched without being seen and still feel the watcher like a hand. On the 4th night, I decided to confirm if the clock was part of whatever this was. I set the alarm on my phone for 1:57 and went to bed early, burned out by moving boxes and heavy thoughts. When the alarm sounded, I felt the punch of it in my ribs, the way bad news landed when I was a kid. I went to the window and raised the shade just enough to see the porch across the street. It looked empty. For the first time since I had noticed the man, I felt foolish and grateful at once, a combination that always translates as relief. At 2, the porch light inside his house came on. It was a low lamp glow, not the white ceiling light. It stretched his shadow out the doorway and onto the boards. He stepped into it with a blanket folded over his arm. He sat with care. The chair moved once, its head angled up at my window. There is a stage in fear where the mind, panicked and tired of running, chooses to walk toward the thing rather than suffer its own anticipation. I went downstairs and out onto my porch and crossed the street barefoot because shoes would have felt like armor, and I did not want to be a man in armor in front of a neighbor. The asphalt was still warm. The wind had died. The only sound was the jittery tick of a cooling engine from a car 2 houses down that must have come home late. I stopped at the foot of his steps and put my hand on the railing so he would not be startled by my presence. He did not startle. He did not look at me. He looked at my bedroom window. I said hello. The word came out wrong, halfway between a greeting and a whisper. I said I was sorry to bother him. I said I was new to the street and wanted to introduce myself. I said my name. His mouth was thin and pale and halfway between a frown and a line. The chair rocked back and forward 1 inch and then settled. He did not answer. He did not blink. I stepped up 1 stair. I could see the veins on the back of his hands like pale wires under old paper. I could see a spot of dark on the left side of his undershirt as if he had set a wet coffee cup there, and the fabric had dried around the stain. I said I was worried something might be wrong. He breathed, I thought. I thought I saw the cap of his chest rise just enough to convince me I had imagined a night without air. I said I just wanted to make sure he was okay. He turned his head a fraction, not toward me, toward my shoulder. The angle of it was wrong, a degree too low. I felt cold along my spine as if the night had pushed a finger there. I stepped back down and said I was across the street if he needed anything, and I went home and lay awake until the birds started. You would call someone? I did not. First, because I did not want to be the man who moved to the block and dialed a complaint because an old neighbor kept strange hours. Second, because I could not put the right words in the right order for a dispatcher without hearing my own voice sound like a liar. A man sitting on his porch at night and looking across the street is not a crime. It is a fact you live beside. The way you live beside the sound of pumps working deep below the surface of this county, or the way you live beside the memory of fire in a patch of lawn where a child once lit a puddle of gasoline out of boredom. I went to work and loaded cable into crates, and my hands found the rhythm and the work felt clean. When I came home, the house had the late afternoon glare that makes everything look cheap and honest. I took a nap on the couch, something I never do, and woke at 6:19 to the taste of old sleep and the throb of a dream running for a while after it ended. The dream did not leave a story. It left a feeling like having been observed by something, too patient to nod. At the end of that week, the man across the street became part of the shape of my days. At 2 I would wake, whether I had gone to bed at 9 or midnight. I would lie still and listen for the wind. If the wind was up, I would tell myself the chair would not rock, because the sound of wind is heavier than the sound of wood. It did. Anyway, the blanket stayed over his knees on warm nights and on the 2 cool nights that made the town sigh with relief. One dawn, I woke early and stood at the kitchen sink and watched his door. He opened it at 5:07 and stepped out without the blanket. He had the same white undershirt and the pearl snap shirt open. I did not run. I wanted to. I wanted to turn and take the steps 3 at a time and cut my feet on the sidewalk and fling myself through my own door and lock it and push. A dresser against it like a bad movie. Instead, I put one hand on the back of the chair. It felt cool and dry. The slat under my palm had a tiny notch where a ring had once caught and worn the wood thin. That small human error, that bite taken out of a perfect shape, steadied me for a breath. I slid my hand from the back of the chair to the cap of his shoulder. I do not know what gesture I thought I was making. Comfort, maybe the insane mercy of touching a thing to ask it to be less wrong. My hand met fabric. The fabric met something flat and hard beneath it. Not like bone, not like wood. The hardness had give and none at once. The way a gravestone feels if you press your palm against it and fool yourself that it is warm because the sun touched it earlier. I pulled back. The pearl snap shirt shifted and the collar sagged to reveal a pale band around the throat where the sun had not reached for a long time. The band had a mark on it, like a crease left by something tight and unforgiving. The chair rocked. His mouth opened wider. The sound that came was not a sound. It was the absence of a sound you expect. It was the moment in a story where a person draws breath to speak and the storyteller cuts away. I bent closer because there is always a compulsion to finish the moment you have started, even when finishing it threatens to take you with it. His breath was not breath. The air that reached my face was as cold as an old freezer and smelled faintly, insistently, of turned earth and stale oil and the perfume my grandmother wore on Sundays when I was small. A light behind me came on. My bedroom window. My girlfriend Lila had woken and opened the shade in her way of dealing with bad dreams and sleeplessness. The light crossed my shoulder and touched the slope of his cheek. The plane of his face reflected nothing. It took the light and did not give it back. The shape of his ear had a small notch missing near the top where an old piercing might have been. A thread of something dark and hard crossed the notch, sunk in like a stitch left behind. He turned his face a fraction further, as if the light had weight and the weight felt like a hand. The blanket slid the rest of the way off his knees. The pant leg fell open. The shin beneath it was the wrong shape, too straight, too narrow. White material lay where skin should have been, not bone, not wood, not anything I wanted to name while standing on a stranger's porch in Odessa at 2 in the morning with the wind holding its breath. It looked like paper lit from within. It looked like the form a man leaves behind when the man has gone, but the idea of him does not allow the chair to be empty. I said I am sorry without knowing who I apologized to. The shadow inside the doorway tipped as if a floor had given way. Beneath it, and then righted itself, and then tipped again. The old man's mouth closed. He lifted his hand again and placed it on the arm of the chair with the care of a person, setting a photograph of someone beloved back on a shelf. He angled his chin back toward my window, and I knew with a surge of dread that felt almost like grace that whatever portion of attention I had borrowed by crossing the street belonged to the window now and not to me. I went down the steps in an orderly way because disorder would have broken something fragile inside me I would not be able to fix. I crossed the street. I climbed my own stairs. Lila stood in the bedroom in a t-shirt that had shrunk on her and a pair of shorts she never wore in public. She asked me what the hell I was doing over there. Her face was pale as heat rash. I said, "He is not alive." She closed her eyes as if tasting something sour. She said, "Of course he is not, Riley." Then she said it differently, the second part separated from the first. "Of course he is not." The wind started again and pushed a thin line of West Texas dust under our window screen. The dust smelled like dryer lint and old pennies. I closed the shade and the room turned softer around the edges. I did not sleep. Neither did she. We lay side by side and felt the floor take our weight and give a little and take it again. The next morning, I went to the county clerk's office. I do not know what I expected to find. Neat ledger with the name Delaney underlined twice. A piece of paper that would fold the night into a rational square I could put on a shelf. The clerk had a bored kindness particular to people whose jobs require them to watch strangers unravel in front of them. She gave me an old file, smelled of dust and the sugar of disintegrating glue. There was a death certificate, February 1998, porch chair, cold snap. A neighbor called it. In its 6:12 a.m., the paramedics wrote notations that made my mouth dry. Hypothermia, rigor, time window, consistent. Another sheet noted that the deceased's daughter had signed for release. There was a building permit from 2002 for porch repairs. There was a lien notice from 2006. There was nothing that said he should not be sitting there at 2 in the morning. There never would be. I went home and resolved to move our bed into the back room. Lila nodded vigorously, as if the idea were a rope thrown to a drowning swimmer. We spent the evening dragging furniture and sweating and pretending we hadn't. Notice the way the house seemed to tilt toward the front after dark. At 2, the chair rocked. We could feel it in the way a man feels a train in the rails through the palms of his hands laid to a track. We slept together for the first time in days. At 2:46, a soft scrape sounded on the floor above us. Not a chair, a footstep. We lay still and counted. 2 more soft steps. The sound drifted as if crossing from one side of the room to the other, and then out into the hall and then back. Lila took my arm and whispered, "Did you lock the door?" Had? The front door, the back door, the windows, the basement hatch in the kitchen floor that led to the crawlspace under the original structure. But there are doors you cannot lock if you live in the same air as an old man who refuses to accept that chairs can be empty forever. The next night, I sat in the living room with every light on. Lila went to her sister's in Midland because sometimes leaving is what you do for a person you want to keep. At 2, I stood in the dark of the stairwell and watched a stripe of faint light creep along the floor of the upstairs hall. The light was not from outside. It came from across the street, through my bedroom window. Through the shade, because the shade was less a barrier than a suggestion, and then along the floorboards to the top stair. I did not move. A soft weight settled on the stair rail beside my hand. You will think I am exaggerating. You will ask what a soft weight feels like. It feels like the gathering of a sleeve around an elbow. It feels like the old warmth of a body translated into pressure that remembers the body. It feels like a hand you would give anything not to hold. I went back across the street without pride or plan. The porch felt colder that night, as if the heat had been scoured off each board. The oval stain around the chair leg looked darker than before. He did not turn his head when I stood there. He did not blink. He watched the square of my window that must have been black from his vantage, because I had drawn the shade down, and turned the lights off. I said, "Please." He did not move. I said please with the kind of begging sound that sounds like a person trying to cough out a hard thing. The blanket on his knees stirred as if a breeze had passed under it. No breeze touched me. He opened his mouth a fraction, and this time a sound came. It was small. It was the smallest sound a person can make and still have it be a sound. It was a word once, I think, when a tongue and teeth lived where now there is a memory of a mouth. I leaned close and heard a syllable. 'Twas the beginning of a name and the end of one. It could have been mine. It could have been his daughter's. It could have been the name of the street. Newcomb. It was a sound, too. It's tired to climb all the way out. I said I will close the curtains forever. I will move rooms. I will leave. The shadow inside the doorway. Tipped, the man lifted his eyes a fraction higher toward where my window would be if the wall were not in the way. The chair rocked. An inch, that was all. 2 days later, Lila and I carried boxes down the steps and into a rental truck. We told ourselves we were moving because her job in Midland needed her sooner than expected. We told the landlord that the neighborhood was too quiet for us. We told each other as we lifted a dresser and scraped the banister that we were practical people and that practical people know when a house is not for them. At 1:58 p.m., while the August light murdered color and every car hood on the block burned the palms of your hands on contact, the old man sat in his chair. He did not come out at night that day. He came out at 2 in the afternoon and faced my window in the full blank of heat. He wore the blanket. He stared, unblinking. He did not shield his eyes. He did not sweat. A neighbor walking his dog paused across the street and frowned and kept walking and did not look again. We drove away before night fell because the idea of leaving in the dark felt like walking out of a church backwards. I did not look in the rearview mirror. Lila did. She did not tell me what she saw. She put her hand on my knee and left it there. And between Odessa and Monaghan's, a thunderhead stood up on the horizon like a city and shook. A line of heat lightning from its pocket, but sent us no rain. 3 weeks later, curiosity took me back. I told myself I was in town for paperwork and a handshake with an old coworker. I drove down Newcomb Street at 1:50 in the afternoon, with the air conditioner fighting a losing battle. The house looked as it had before. The porch boards lay straight and painted a tired gray that tried for respectability and landed on an honesty that smelled faintly of old water. The chair sat where it had always sat. A new curtain hung in my old bedroom window. The new tenants had chosen a cheerful pattern with pale blue flowers that would never have lasted in our care. At 2 o'clock exactly, the front door of Mr. Delaney's house opened. The halo of the lamplight inside was small and insufficient against the day. He stepped into the doorway. He sat. He placed the blanket across his knees. The chair rocked 1 inch. He turned his head toward the window where strangers now slept. He did not care that they were strangers. He did not care that I had left. He did not care about the arrangements of the living. He cared only for the square of glass and the measure of attention it cost him to hold it. I parked midway down the block and walked up the sidewalk and stopped at the foot of his steps, aching with the knowledge that you cannot confront what will not admit the terms of confrontation. I did the small, brave thing available. I took out my phone and opened the camera and pointed it at him. The screen showed the porch. It showed the chair. It showed the stain around the leg. It did not show the man. The chair rocked on the screen, as if an invisible wind had caught it. The hairs on my arms lifted and then lay flat. The screen brightened and dimmed as the auto-adjust hunted for a subject and found none. I lowered the phone and looked with my eyes. He sat where he sat. He stared where he stared. He was an old man dressed in the uniform of his last days. He was a blank. He was a lesson. He was a piece of grief, too stubborn to leave the piece of wood that had cradled it at the end. When I finally forced myself to walk up those steps one last time, I did it not to win or to argue, but to acknowledge. I stood beside him and said, the only true thing I had learned since moving to Odessa. I said, I see you. He did not answer. He did not need to. The chair rocked. The stain held its shape. The wind came up out of the west with the smell of diesel and cottonseed. The shadow inside the door tipped and steadied and tipped again, eager as a dog that cannot cross a line it does not understand. I put my hand on the arm of the chair. I did not touch him. The wood felt cool and honest. I said the name on the death certificate, said goodbye. He angled his chin up half a degree toward the square of glass that belonged to new people he would never know. He was not looking at me. He would never look at me. He would never look at anyone. He would only look and look and look until the house finally understood the absence it sheltered and fell in on itself or the city, sent a truck and took the boards apart, and someone burned them. And even then, I suspect the smoke would roll out over Odessa at 2 in the morning and turn its gray face to any lit square it found. We moved, the nights came, and I learned to sleep again in a bedroom that faced an alley and a wall of orange. Trumpet vine that moved only when wind or something with a hand moved it. Sometimes, in the middle of the night, I wake without knowing why and think of the minute before, too. The street, the chair, the blanket, the oval stain that is part history and part warning. I picture a new tenant peeking out through those pale blue curtains and asking a partner if they see what they see, and the partner grumbling and turning and the peek becoming a stare. I imagine a cat with half its whiskers missing padding across, a stranger's porch and threading around an ankle that cannot feel it, and then springing away without a sound. I know somewhere across that hard, flat city, at any hour the wind chooses, a rocker moves 1 inch and then back. I know the old man is there, not alive, not dead in a way that matters to wood, a watcher fixed to a porch and a window, proving something to himself night by night that he could not quite prove in the cold. If you ever move there and you raise your shade at 2, you will understand this exactly. You will not need me to tell you he is not alive. You will realize it the moment you see him, and that is worse than being told, because the knowledge will arrive already seated in the chair, and it will not stand when you ask it to. When we moved to Lubbock, I told myself the wind would be the hardest thing to get used to. Back in Fort Worth, the air felt heavy, like it had weight and purpose. Out here, it came uninvited and constant, a blunt breath moving dust along the curbs, rattling the loose soffits, moaning down the little lane where our house squatted beneath a sky too big to be trusted. Our place was a one-story with a low brown roof and an entryway that smelled like old books. The owner had died in hospice. His son sold cheap, and I figured we had lucked into something. Jenna said the street had character, said the street. Had a lean, she laughed. We had been married 9 years, and we still made each other laugh, which is probably why we believed we could make a new start among strangers and fields. And the ceaseless wind. I noticed the house across the street on the first night, a modest rectangle of beige siding with weathered shutters and a porch that sloped just enough to keep rainwater from pooling. The real estate listing had shown it as empty. The moving van had come and gone from our driveway while the windows over there stayed blank and uncurtained. At dusk, I took the folded cardboard out to the curb, and when I turned back, the windows of the house across the street were lit. Not 1 or 2, all of them. A yellow glow like bedroom lamps, each square of light a picture frame. I stood there, a long moment with the flattened box in my hands, and listened to the wind, which somehow found a way to sound curious. The living room, the kitchen, the bedroom at the back with the taller window, the small square at the side that must have been a bathroom or a laundry room. All lit, not blazing, just steady, like they had been turned on with the same careful hand. Jenna came out to check on me, and I realized I had been standing there long enough for the cardboard edge to bite my palms. I nodded toward the glow. "That is a lot of electricity for one little house," she said. She said it like a joke, but her voice had a catch and her eyes stayed on those warm squares across the street. She has never liked waste. She hates a lamp. Left on in an empty room, and she is more practical than afraid. So when she sounded like that, I noticed we ate cold pizza off the tailgate and watched the lighted windows. The sky went from steel to charcoal to layered blue and still the lights. Across the street showed steady. A moth battered itself on our porch light. A dog I hadn't seen before barked 3 houses down and then abruptly stopped, as if reminded. Somewhere in the dark, a train hauled itself along the flat with a ribbon of complaint. At 9, I took the last of the moving straps inside. At 10, Jenna set her toothbrush in a cup that did not belong to this sink and shut the bathroom door. At midnight, I got up to pee and stood hall naked at the little window by the front door. Every window at the house across the street was still lit. It felt like a dare. It felt like a hand placed palm down in the middle of a table and no one. Looking at it in the morning, I thought I would catch them outside and get a name. Maybe a neighborly hello. There were tire marks in the gravel driveway across the way, deep grooves that had been there long enough to be familiar, and a small square of patched lawn that had surrendered to brown this late in June, but no car. The blinds were down behind. The lit windows, you could see the pale horizontal slats if you squinted. The door had one of those pitted brass knockers shaped like a lion head and a screen door with a small tear near the bottom corner. If someone had come in late, they had done it quietly. If someone had turned off the lights, they had turned them on again. We met Marla that afternoon, which was a gift and a warning. She padded over in rubber flip-flops and a hot pink shirt that tried too hard and introduced herself as next door. On our side, not across. She handed Jenna a mason jar of pickles that tasted like salt and dill and something lemony. I asked who lived across the street, and she chewed on her words for a heartbeat before saying an older woman. Not old, but older, and a girl. The words fell wrong and thin, like she was using someone else's story. She told us people kept themselves around here, and this was not the city. Jenna said that sounded nice. I asked the girl's age, and Marla said she did not know. Then guessed, then said, school age, I suppose. Her eyes slid to the house across the street and never really left it. Lights, she said. Like it was the end of the sentence. That evening at dinner, we joked about petty grievances. Like writing a letter to ask them to please conserve energy, and Jenna said we should put it on City of Lubbock letterhead. We could. Draw in crayon. When dusk came, the square blinds across the street glowed again, each window a tidy lantern. 10 minutes later, the blinds shifted like a breeze inside the house had made them stir. Except the windows were closed, and I did not believe in breezes moving in that particular way. I went out front and pretended to sweep the walkway. The light had a texture, the way a cheap lampshade throws the grain of its paper, if you look long enough. Through the texture of it, I saw something else, or wanted to. A shape crossing the room behind the largest front window. A long shape, taller than me by a head, moving from left to right, with a gait that managed to be both swift and reluctant. I told myself I was seeing the shadow of a mailman cut across the window from the sidewalk. Except there was no sidewalk, just a stubbled strip of roadside between 2 gullies choked with tumbleweed. The shape did not have the motion of someone outside. It crossed behind the slats and then was gone. I went in. Jenna watched my face, and I told her. She nodded and said, "You want to walk over there, don't you?" I told her no, not tonight, not. As strangers, she agreed even faster than I expected. She is braver than me, but not foolish. We decided to give it a week. The lights stayed on that night, and the next, and the next. On the 4th night, I saw the boy. At least, I thought he was. A boy. He was not the girl Marla had mentioned. This figure was shorter than the tall one, shorter than me by a head or two, too thin in the shoulders and neck. A wiry outline the way a fence post looks thin against a pale sky. He came as a silhouette in the hallway behind the front room. A darker absence in the yellow glow. He stood still and then leaned to the side like he was looking around a corner. I waited for someone to call to him. No one called. He leaned further, a neck like a rope, and then jerked back. It was the suddenness that knocked something loose inside me. I had never seen movement like that. A rubber band release that was all pull and no gently. I heard my own breath, and it sounded like someone else's. Something clicked to my left, and I flinched. But it was only Jenna locking the front door. In the morning, I took the trash out, and Marla was watering a patch of tomato plants that looked exhausted. We waved like we had a shared secret. I cleared my throat and said, "Have you ever been inside the house across the street?" Marla shook her head immediately, and then, after a second, shook it again. Slower, like she was making sure her body had understood her brain. She said, "You don't go bothering people." I said that made sense. I said the lights were weird. She said, "It is their house," and then added, "It has always been that way." Always stretched out a little too long. The fifth night the wind died for. An hour and the quiet was like a held breath. In the heavy calm, I heard something from the house across the street I could have missed any other time. A steady ticking, too regular to be settling pipes, too soft to be a clock heard through closed walls at that distance. It kept time with my pulse and then somehow commandeered it. I felt my heart begin to line up with that faraway tick, which was a stupid thought but not untrue, and my ears strained for it until the wind came back and there was nothing but the whisper of dust. Jenna said we should make a pie on the weekend and introduce ourselves with manners. She is from Temple and thinks a pie can fix most things. I asked her what kind, and she said pecan, because it is an apology and a declaration both. Saturday morning she baked while the air conditioning worked too hard, and I raked bits of roofing that had fallen into the side yard. After lunch we crossed, because we had to cross sometime, and stood at the foot of the flat concrete porch. Jenna balancing the pie, and me with both hands in my pockets, because otherwise I would have to hold something. Flakes of paint lay in the porch corner like fish scales. The door had a screen that clicked lightly against its frame, even with no wind. Up close, I saw that the tier near the bottom had been patched, with a square of clear tape that held dust like pollen. Jenna knocked gently. The sound of her knuckles on wood felt too intimate. We waited. The lights were on behind the blinds. The hallway one seemed brighter than the front room. I felt a slope in my stomach, like I was standing on a boat. Jenna knocked again, louder. The click and brush of the screen faded to something like the tick I had heard earlier. I cleared my throat. A car turned in a driveway a block away, and the sound traveled slowly and unwillingly. I knocked. No one answered the door, but someone changed their mind about being unseen. The front room blinds tilted, not all at once, but in a ripple that started near the top and washed down like a small sigh. The tilt opened the narrowest slice of sightline. Behind it, I saw a strip of something pale. It might have been a wall. It might have been a cheek. It did not move, but the blinds breathed again, slats leveling in the opposite direction, and the strip of pale became a strip of darker, like a mouth held in a thin line. Then the blinds were back to their original tilt, and the window square returned to that polite yellow glow, as if nothing had happened. Jenna said hello. We're new across the street, and held up the pie with a nervous smile. The lion-head knocker grinned at us without interest. I thought I heard the faint movement of someone further away inside the house, a soft shift-like fabric on tile. No footsteps. I had the sudden ridiculous idea that the interior floors were all padded, carpeted, wall-to-wall, with something soft enough to swallow footfalls. The thought made me shiver despite the heat. We left the pie on the step. Jenna wrote our names and phone number on a napkin and slid it under the pie plate. We crossed back, faintly relieved and faintly ashamed. That night, the pie was gone. The plate was not returned. I did not see when it happened. I stood at the window longer than was sane, and I did not see the door open, did not see a hand reach. For our offering, did not see a cat slink and pull it under the screen with improbably clever paws. The pie simply ceased to be there, as if it had never been there, and the house across the street kept its lights on. We settled into a pattern, because people always do. We watched the house across the street in the evenings, like it was a live program, and the house obliged by being itself. Shapes moved behind the blinds. The tall one less often, the wiry boy more. Once I saw a squat, blocky figure carry something from the hallway into the kitchen window's lit square. It looked heavy and uneven, and the way the figure's shoulders tilted made me think it did not wish to be carrying it. I decided it was a television. I told myself that was reasonable. The television theory was thin but comforting. Jenna said, "Maybe," and squeezed my hand. She started to dream. They were not normal ones, with a beginning and a muddled end. These dreams had the clear edges of remembered rooms. 3 nights in a row, she woke me with a little gasp and lay very still, and when I asked if she was all right, she said she had been in a kitchen that was not ours and had been counting spoons. Not using them, counting. She would go through drawers, touching each with the tip of her finger, careful, whispering numbers that broke and mended and broke again in her throat. I asked if the kitchen was from her childhood. She shook her head. I asked if it belonged to someone we knew. She said that would make it simpler. She did not say the house across the street, and neither did I, but we both thought it. The next morning, I opened our drawer and counted our spoons and got lost at 8. In July, the heat lifted itself out of the soil and held there, pinning everything in place. The air conditioning died, and we slept on top of the sheets, damp and irritated. From our front window, the light across the street looked less like glow and more like painted squares. The boy's silhouette came and went. The tall figure came and did not go for a long time, standing in the hallway window, elongated and wrong, like a reflection caught in a spoon. When I could not sleep, I counted the seconds between small motions, a lean of the blinds as if exhaled. On a subtle swing of shadow, started to hear the tick more often. It faded during the day as if the sun bullied it, then grew stronger after sunset, a pulse that did not need ears to be measured. It traveled through the window glass and into me, and when I finally slept, I dreamed of a pendulum that had forgotten what it was for. On a Tuesday, I saw the girl. She stood in the small window I had first thought was a bathroom. It was shoulder height and square as a tile. Her head was not quite centered, the way a picture hangs before someone straightens it with a firm hand. She looked left, then right, then held still as if listening to a lesson that was happening elsewhere in the house. She had straight hair and a smooth face, and something about her mouth suggested carefulness. My chest hurt like I had been running. I called Jenna, and we stood together looking out, and Jenna said the girl was maybe 12. When she said it, we both knew the word maybe had been put there on purpose. A guard at the door. The girl's eyes were level and water dark. The light behind her made her edges soft. She blinked once, a slow lowering as if deciding. Then she was gone. The window was a square of yellow again, and I felt like I had been dismissed. I began to pay attention to the times the lights were turned on. They were always on by dusk and always on by midnight. The mornings were stranger. Sometimes I would wake at 4 and they would still be lit. Sometimes I would start coffee at 6 and they would still be lit. Twice I woke Jenna before dawn and none took her hand to the front window and showed her that the square glows had not changed even as the sky behind them lightened. At 8, a gray bird perched on the wire between our houses and cocked its head at the lights like it was trying to. Here's something that needed seeing. By 9, the lights would be off. but rarely all at once. One window would go dull, then another, then an hour would pass, and another would relent. It gave me a picture in my mind of someone walking from room to room in a methodical circuit, perhaps carrying a clipboard, ticking boxes. The thought calmed me because it meant people rather than a mechanism. People can be asked questions. People can answer. In the second week of August, heat lightning danced far away, and the smell of rain tried to walk up our street and got lost. Jenna sat on the couch with a magazine and read the same paragraph over and over. I stood at the front window like a guard dog born nervous. A shape moved in the kitchen window across the street, and I found myself pressing my forehead to the glass of our door, the way a child would. The kitchen's glow dimmed for a heartbeat, as though a figure had passed too close to a lamp and stolen its authority. I thought I saw a hand come up at the window. If it was a hand, it was backward, palm toward the glass, fingers together, but the thumb on the wrong side. A trick of perspective, I told myself, a trick of distance. The hand hung there and did not wave. It slid down the window very slowly and left no trail. I started to notice differences in the silhouettes. The tall one's head was wrong. Not too big or small, just shaped in a way you would not draw if asked to draw a person. The boy's shoulders sloped toward one another like a rabbit. The girl's head tilt was a question she expected no one to answer. I tried to imagine other explanations. Maybe the tall one had a hat. Maybe the boy had a hoodie. Maybe the girl leaned because her neck hurt. Each maybe became less useful than the last. We went to Home Depot for blinds because Jenna said ours were a mess and we needed privacy. I knew it was because watching the house across the street had become the thing we did, and she wanted to make it a choice rather than a compulsion. On the way home, we passed a dry field where a wrinkled scarecrow flapped a sleeve at us without help from the wind, and I gripped the wheel hard enough to make my fingers ache. The sky was white as bone. In the checkout line, a woman in a red apron told a joke about a ladder that did not need hearing, and I smiled like I had been taught how. When we turned onto our street, there was a small shape in our driveway that looked like a pile of leaves. It was a plate. It was our plate. It was the one we had left with the pie. On it sat the napkin with our names, the writing blurred and shiny as if it had been licked. The plate was placed as centered could be, the sort of centered that was measured. I parked badly and got out, holding my breath without meaning to. The napkin was wet and smelled faintly sweet. I had written our names in ballpoint, and the ink had feathered. Someone had traced the letters with a finger until the paper could not hold anything else. The plate was clean, not scrubbed. Clean, like it had been new all along. We took it inside and washed it again and put it in the back of the cabinet behind the big mixing bowl and pretended that was that. That night, the lights across the street came on in the same patient sequence. But for the first time in weeks, I could not see any movement at all. It was worse than movement. A kind of stillness does not mean quiet. It means held. I drove by slow the next day as an errand to nowhere. The blinds hung at identical angles. The porch held its breath. If there were cars parked behind the house, I could not see them. I drove around the block again and told myself I was looking for a hardware store I already knew was the other direction. On my third pass, a man stepped out from between two houses at the end of the street and watched me with a posture that said I had already earned the watching. He wore a cap with a cattle brand I did not recognize and forearms like fence rails. I waved, and he did not wave back. When I got home, Marla was on her porch with a glass of something that wanted ice. She told me neighbors notice if you circle. Like that. She said it kindly and without kindness. I asked if there was a homeowners association, and she barked out a laugh that was not a laugh. I asked again about the house across the street, as if repetition could make an answer truer. She said words I could not argue with. They have lived there long enough. She said it like a prayer and a curse. Then she said their power never goes out. Ours does 3 or 4 times a summer. You just blink and it is gone. But their lights do not even tremble. I told her power lines do strange things. She nodded and drank. She said it again about trembling. I did not sleep that night, and the lights across the street shone steady and unblinking. A row of eyes that refused to water. The first time the girl waved, she did not move her hand. She stood at the small square window, and her head dipped twice and came back up, like a nod thrown sideways. I had been sitting with Jenna, watching our own television. A video of people driving through rain on a highway 2 states away because the sound of it made her sleepy. I stood and walked to the door without knowing I was standing and walking. When I got there, the girl dipped her head again. I raised my hand. I did not wave either. I lifted it, palm inward, and held it there. She stood very still then, like someone had said freeze in a game in a tone that was not playful. I wanted to put my hand against the glass of our window. It did not. My skin felt full of small needles, the way it does before a storm. The girl's mouth opened, and I realized she had been pressing her lips together hard, which had made them thin. When they relaxed, the outline of her mouth looked ordinary and young and almost kind. Then she turned away. The light in that little square stayed the same. I realized I had not seen the girl blink. Perhaps I had, and my memory was stubborn. Perhaps people seeing what they want to see is the first thing that happens and not the last at the end of August. A boy broke into a car 2 streets over and someone chased him, and the chasing poured into our block like water into a low place. Men with flashlights pointed light where it did not belong, and wives told them the police would handle it. I was in our yard with the rake I had grabbed too. Looked like I belonged outside if anyone asked what I was doing. The men shone their lights across yards and up into the pecan tree near the end of our drive, and one beam straight to the house across the street, stabbing through the screen and against the blind of the wide front window. The light from the flashlight lay on the blind and did not show slats or cords. It showed something smooth. The man holding the beam swore under his breath like he had burned his hand and jerked the light away. I caught his eye, and he looked at me not as a neighbor looks at a neighbor, but as a soldier looks at a man who has just heard artillery for the first time. The police came and went, and there was no boy in a tree, and we all returned to our lives. The house across the street kept its lights on, and that night was the first time I thought the wrong thought and let it stay. Maybe those are not lights. Maybe they are openings, and what comes through them is what makes my skin feel like wool, stretched too tight on a frame. I did not tell Jenna that thought. I told her a softer one. I said I thought they slept in the day and lived at night. That is why the patterns are so wrong, I said. That is why no one answers. She did not tell me her worst thought either. Not then. Oh. She said, then we should respect. They're ours. Then she turned and rearranged the magnets on the refrigerator so that our son Owen's field trip permission slip did not overlap our dentist appointment card. We do not have a son. We have never had a son. The magnets held up too, polite rectangles that made more sense than they had any right to. I stood there and looked at the neat blue line of a name that was familiar and foreign and thought, how odd. Did I know the slope of that? Oh, Jenna looked at me, and I looked at her, and the room had the smell kitchens have at 10 at night. When nothing is cooking, a flat warmth that belongs to walls and not to food. I took the dentist card off the fridge and turned it over, and it was blank and dear and wrong. The next day, I found our mail arranged on the console table by the front door, fanned and tidy. A junk flyer shuffled in such a way that the caption, "You deserve better," grinned up at us in neat caps. I do not arrange mail. Jenna does not either. She said she must have and forgot. I said the same. We left it as it was and stepped around it for an hour until stepping around it became something else. I put the dentist card back on the refrigerator and it stayed until morning, and then it was gone. Where debt goes is inside a drawer. I started to dream too. In mine, I stood in our front yard and watched two people. I could not pull a heavy thing down the hallway of the house across the street. The hallway stretched like it does in a cheap motel, longer than any interior hallway has the right to be. The heavy thing they pulled had corners. I woke with my jaw clenched and my tongue tasted like bitter metal, the way it does when you have said something unadvised. Jenna slept beside me and made a small sound like a hinge, restful and human, and exactly what I wanted to keep. And I put my hand on her back so that the little bones there would keep their place in the order of things. In September, a storm finally came in close enough to touch. We sat on our porch and watched sheets of rain push the dust around. The gutters overflowed after 10 minutes, and the street turned into a shallow river that remembered its bed too well. The lights were on in the house across the street as the rain came, which made a flat watercolor of the scene. I felt daring enough to wave. I stood on the edge of our porch and lifted my arm and let it swing once like a person talking without words. A figure appeared in the wide front window, not the tall one, not the boy, but something with a thicker waist and a neck that made me think of rope left outside all winter. The figure did not wave. It placed both hands against the blinds, hard, in a way that should have made the slats bow, and the slats did not bow. The rain hunched its shoulders and went about its business. I waited, and the figure stood, and then the lights went out. For 3 seconds, maybe 4, the house across the street was dark. The difference was like a friend who always whispers suddenly shouting. The rain, which had been loud all along, rushed in to fill the staggering quiet in my head. And then the lights came back on hard and full, all at once, brighter than they had been before, bright enough that the nearest window seemed white. A reflection of the lightning, I told myself. A surge. A grid hiccup. I listened for the tick and heard it double itself and then split into 2 different speeds, like a drumline practicing on a distant hill. After the storm, a branch lay in our driveway like a crooked arm. I went out with a saw and cleared it. When I straightened, a man stood in the yard across the street. I say man because of size. He was the height of the tall figure I had seen as a silhouette. But his outline had edges now, and edges mean a person whether you want them to or not. He wore a shirt the color of oatmeal and pants that did not fit him. His head turned and stopped halfway between me and the house next to mine, like he was listening to a sound coming from the gutter. His hands hung wrong, soft at the wrists. Like snapping them into fists would be too rude for midday. I did not wave and I did not call hello. Not because I lacked manners, but because every part of me wanted to keep the moment from becoming one that required a response. He turned slowly the rest of the way toward me. His face did not look unfinished or grotesque or remarkable in any way I could claim out loud. It looked like a face drawn by a careful child who had never seen one up close. Features in the right places, proportions like the idea of a person, not the fact. He watched me. The watching was not aggressive. It was not curious. It was done in the way you look at a clock because it is a clock and because it will be a clock the next time you look. I nodded. The man held still long enough for the wind to bring me a smell that was not rain or earth or heat. It was a smell like hot wires. Then he turned and walked toward his house. His walk was a list of steps that had been written down and rehearsed. Heel, ball, toe. Heel, ball, toe. I closed my eyes and he was gone before I opened them, and the lights inside the house were a soft yellow like milk. That night, Jenna got up and went to the window and stood for an hour. I woke and watched her, not sure whether I belonged in the same room as whatever gravity bound her to the glass. When she came back to bed, she was cold through her t-shirt, as if she had been standing outside. I put my hand on her hip, and she put her hand on mine, and we stayed like that for a long time. When I started to drift, she said a sentence that did not require an answer, and yet it was an answer to something. She said, "I think the girl counts the lights." She said it like a nursery rhyme and an algorithm both, soft enough that the words barely separated. I wanted to ask, count them how? She said she counts all the windows, and then she starts again, and if she gets a different number the second time, she begins again until the numbers are the same. I said nothing because sometimes your mouth is for breathing and not for words. We lasted until October like that, a pair of people with jobs and routines. I worked at a tire warehouse near the loop, lifting and moving and inventorying, and sometimes driving a forklift that did not like me. Jenna did bookkeeping part-time for a dentist whose wife filled the waiting room with fake plants that had been dusted more in concept than in fact. We ate casseroles and eggs, and sometimes nothing. We watched shows, and we did not watch shows. The house across the street never turned off its lights. We told ourselves we did not look as often as we had before. We were liars of the ordinary and domestic type. Halloween came with a gray sky and a wind that could not wake itself. The children up the block decided they would trick-or-treat anyway, a ragtag of pirates and witches and superheroes. Their parents walked behind them carrying umbrellas closed and useless. Jenna bought a bag of candy and set it in a bowl with a silly ceramic ghost I remembered from our apartment 6 years ago and could not remember packing. When the children came, we laughed and let the littlest ones grab an extra. The house across the street did nothing. The lights were on. The blinds were down. The porch was empty. The children did not climb its steps. Parents glanced at it with eyes like fence staples. Everyone knows which houses to miss without deciding. When the last child had gone and the street held only wrappers and weak street light, Jenna said, "I want to leave them something." I said we had left them a pie. She said, "I want to leave them a light." The desire in her voice was not a thing I knew how to hold. She went to the hall closet and found an old nightlight we had used in an outlet for our nephew when he slept over. It was shaped like a small house and glowed warm when plugged in. She wrapped the cord around it and held it like a strange pet. We walked outside together. The air smelled like costume plastic and beginning cold. We crossed the street without looking both ways. The porch steps were shallow and honest. Jenna set the nightlight on the top step and tucked the cord under itself. She did not look at the window. I did. The lights were steady and old. We went back across and into our house. We sat on the couch, and I pulled a blank throw over our knees, even though the night had not earned a blanket. When I woke at 3, the blanket still lay there. The nightlight was gone. Things do not escalate the way movies teach you. There is no steady ramp. There are plateaus and then holes, and sometimes you are walking on a circle of sidewalk, and then you are not. 2 weeks later, I came home from the warehouse and found our living room chairs moved 3 feet to the left. When I asked Jenna, she said she had done it to see if it felt better. It did not. We moved them back. The next day, the chairs were 6 inches forward and slightly turned. We assumed the other. A day after that, Jenna said she had not touched them, and I said I had not either, and we stood there with our hands at our sides and our chairs looking like guests at a formal dinner who had gotten the dress code wrong. I looked through the front window without meaning to, and the house across the street shone in answer. Every window a precise, thoughtful eye. A man from the city came and marked our curb with orange paint because they were going to fix a water line. He looked across at the other house, then looked down and kept marking. He had a small scar on his elbow that showed his life had contained an earlier day. I kept wanting to call out, "Do you see it too?" And not because I wanted company in my seat and my unease, but because I wanted a witness. He marked the spot where he wanted to dig, and he did not look up. The next morning, there was no orange paint on our curb. The curb was as bare as concrete as. I thought I had dreamed the man. On Thursday, the water was turned off for 2 hours, and I heard what must have been his backhoe a street over, and then a sound like something settling forever. When the water came back, I ran it for a full minute, and the smell of iron and stone filled the room, and I breathed it like medicine. The orange paint was back the following day in the exact same place. So exact I could have measured the difference in centimeters if I had the heart. Jenna started writing lists. She had always made grocery lists and lists of what to do on Saturday. Mornings, these lists were different. They were columns of words that made sense the way poetry refuses to apologize for itself. Spoon, hallway, 7, milk, not milk. Girl, girl, says count. Quiet, not quiet, wire bend. Door. She wrote in pen first, and then over the pen with pencil, as if to erase and add in the same motion. I asked if the lists helped, and she said they kept her rooted for an hour at a time. I kissed the back of her neck at the place where hair meets skin, and she leaned forward like I had pushed her. When she slept that night, she whispered numbers that did not form a pattern, and I felt like I might eat those numbers just to keep them from spreading. I tried to be good. I tried to be normal. I took out the garbage on Tuesdays and Fridays, and waved at the same dog walker who never waved back, and changed the air filter and made a joke about the weather to the kid at the gas station, who did not understand jokes. I watched less. I watched nothing. I stood at the window for 3 hours on a Wednesday and did not move. People say you become what you attend to. They do not say what you become when what you attend to is attending to you. It was the boy who came first, not the silhouette, not the thin shadow. A boy in our yard. I had been pulling the hose to water the 3 plants that could still be persuaded, and I looked up, and there he was at the corner of our porch, looking at our front door like he had been invited and had arrived 5 minutes early and wanted to be polite about it. He was maybe 11, maybe 9, maybe taller than that, and folded. I could not keep his age on a hook in my head. His hair lay flat, like the idea of hair. His shirt was gray, and his shorts were not. He raised his hand and did not wave, simply held it up to show me he had one. I said hello like I had a throat. He did not answer. He lowered his hand and picked up the nightlight. It had been back in our house for weeks, and now it was on our porch, lying on its side. He must have placed it there. He must have been here long enough. My mind ran backward and forward in the few seconds between my seeing it and my knowing that I had not placed it. The boy cradled the nightlight as if it gave off heat. The cord trailed across his wrist like a piece of string pulled by a cat. He turned and looked at the house across the street and then back at me, a small shift between poles. He opened his mouth, and what came out was not a word, and it was not a word. It was a sound that has only ever been made in high hallways. He closed his mouth, and the sound kept going for a beat, like a bell rung hard. He walked down our steps and across the street and up onto his porch with the practiced gait of someone who has been to a place more than once the wrong way. He did not open the screen door. He looked at it like someone looks at a locked car when the keys are inside. The nightlight glowed in his hands. My belly turned over like I had tripped. The boy set the nightlight down on the top step, very carefully, and then became thin. I do not know how else to say it. He was a boy, and then he was a silhouette, and then a thinner silhouette. And then he was the idea of someone standing behind a blind, and then he was behind a blind and the house across. The street breathed out. I went inside and washed my hands and could not get them to feel clean. Jenna stood at the sink and did not look at me. I told her the boy had given back the nightlight. She said she knew. Her voice was filmed with sleep, though she had been awake. All day she asked me if I heard a ticking, and I said I always had, and she said, "No, this one is closer." We stood very still. The house made a small sound like wood remembering its tree. Marla knocked at our door the next morning and asked if we were all right. I told her we were, and she said, "Good, good," but she did not leave. She looked at the house across the street, and her mouth did a shape that did not match any word I know. She said that sometimes people forget to move. I asked what she meant. She shook her head. She told us a woman once lived there who arranged the place like a map and could not sleep if a chair was 3 inches wrong. She told us a girl lived there who counted the light from room to room until her mother slapped her hands and told her to stop acting like a rabbit. She told us a man lived there who fixed radios in the kitchen and never threw away the wires, because wires are what keep the words. She said those same people live there still, and she said they do not, and she said it in one sentence, and I recognize the texture of a person who has decided to live with contradiction because it is easier than living without anything. I asked her for their names, and she said she had never been introduced. I asked her how long it had been like this. She said as long as we needed it to have been, and looked at us like a doctor looks at a patient who finally tells the truth. Then she said she was going to visit her sister in Amarillo for a week and asked if we would keep an eye on her tomatoes. We said we would, and she left, and the wind picked up and an empty plastic bag stumbled down the street and flung itself under a truck and died. Do you want me to tell you the worst day? It was not the day with the boy or the day with the pie. It was a Tuesday toward the end of October when the air had a bite and the sky had a bruise. I came home and the house was not wrong, which was now unusual enough to notice. A candle burned on the kitchen counter and smelled like a hotel in a better city. Jenna sat at the table with the lists she had been making and a glass of water with a lemon wedge like someone in a photograph. She said we should call someone. I asked who. She said, anyone. She said, a pastor or a city inspector, or that man with the scar on his elbow, or my sister or your mother. My mother is dead. I said it without saying it. She said we should call someone because if we do not, then we are choosing. I told her I was tired of feeling like everything I did was a decision made by someone else. She nodded like I had said something wise, and then stood and went to the window and looked out and said, "They are standing it up." I went to the window and the house across the street presented itself unwavering. In the wide front window, I saw the tall figure and the blocky one and the girl. I did not see the boy. The 3 of them stood in a shallow triangle, not touching. The tall one had its head turned slightly away, as if listening for a train. The blocky one held something small in its hands, like it had found a bird and did not know what to do about generosity. The girl faced forward, and for the first time I realized that she was not looking out. She was looking at the space in front of her in a precise, considered way, as if the air had been marked with a grease pencil. The light behind them was steady and held no lamp. I could feel the tick under my tongue. They moved in a way that made me think of hands placing a book on a shelf they had no claim to. The tall one stepped forward and then back, a small correction. The blocky one lifted and then lowered. The girl took a step to her left, and then back, and then forward, and then stood, adjusting to a line I could not see. When they were arranged the way they wanted to be, I felt a pressure on my teeth, like when a plane changes altitude without warning. The blinds moved in a ripple. For a split second, they were open enough that I saw the space between the tall figure's arm and torso, and the space was wrong. Not empty, not full. Wrong is the only word I own for it. It bent my eye. I swore softly, and Jenna took my hand and squeezed hard enough to leave marks. The blinds settled, and the light went back to its particular yellow. We called no one. We sat on the couch and ate cereal and watched a show about people buying a house that could never exist. We went to bed and lay there with the ceiling fan, making its honest circle. At some hour that does not belong to any calendar, a small sound woke me. It was a familiar sound because it was the sound our front door makes when someone opens it and is careful. The latch is old and the metal speaks with a little note. I held still with my eyes closed and listened. The door did not close. The silence that followed was not empty. It had the shape of a person in it, the way a quiet room contains the outline of a piece of furniture moved to the garage. I whispered Jenna's name. She answered in her sleep, a murmur that said present. I reached for the bat we keep under the bed because the internet told us to. It felt like the idea of a weapon and not a weapon. I stood and padded down the hallway with the bat pointed toward the floor because up felt like a joke. The light from the street came in polite and weak through the front windows. Our chairs were where we had left them. Our mail was not on the table because mail has its own rules. The door stood ajar, an inch and a thin edge of night looked in, patient. I put my hand to the wood and felt a coolness that had nothing to do with temperature. It felt like an idea placed on my skin without asking. I was about to close the door when a movement to my left turned me into someone else. The hallway that leads to our bedrooms is narrow. It had been mine for months, and I knew the exact sound of my footfalls on it and the smell of detergent that lives there because Jenna does laundry on Sundays. Now, in the doorway to the hall, the girl stood. She was the height of herself. She wore a dress that was not new and not old. Her hands hung at her sides. Her hair was smooth and wrong in no obvious way. In the light from the street, her face belonged to faces. Her eyes looked at a point near my shoulder, and then came back to my face, and then returned to the point near my shoulder. I said hello. She did not answer. She did not open her mouth. Her expression did not change. I felt a thick wash of grief. For her, for me, for anyone who had forgotten a name they were supposed to know. The bat weighed more than it did in daylight. I lowered it. The girl took one step into the room. Was not a step so much as the world scooting toward her. My hindbrain tried to make me move back, and my legs refused because they believed in the old ways of hospitality and hallways. Jenna said my name softly from the bedroom, and I said, "Do not get up." And the girl's eyes shifted the fraction that made the sentence into a piece of furniture you keep bumping with your thigh. She lifted her hand. She did not wave. She held it at the height of her chest, palm in, and then pressed her fingers together, hard, like someone remembering what skin is for. She lowered her hand and took another step, and now she was 3 feet from me, and I could see a freckle near her ear that might not have been a freckle. She leaned her head a fraction. Counting, I thought, stupidly. She is counting. The numbers skittered around her like small animals in leaves. I thought of the nightlight and the plate and the traced letters. I thought of the ticking under my tongue. I thought of the boy becoming thin. I thought of the tall man's face that was not wrong until you used it. The girl reached toward me. My hand went up of its own. Our palms did not touch. They did not get close enough for warmth. When her hand came to a stop, something like a pressure met my skin like 2 magnets refusing. The space between us thickened. She made a very small sound that could have been a breath and could have been a syllable. She looked down at the distance, between our hands, and then up at my face, and then over my shoulder again, and then she was not there. I am not being poetic. She did not step back and walk away. She did not turn into light and slip under a door like in a story. She was there, and then she was not. And the pressure popped, and the bat felt like wood in my hand, and the door was still. Ajar in somewhere, faithfully. The tick took one little step forward. I closed the door and set the bolt and leaned my head against the cool wood and laughed once without humor, and then walked back to our room, like a person crossing a stream, on stones that had been placed by someone who did not believe in feet. In the morning, we did not speak about it. Jenna moved as if every action had been laid out for her. She made coffee and put too little in the filter, and the coffee came out pale and bitter. We drank it without complaint. She asked if we should go to church. We do not go to church. Said yes. We put on decent clothes and drove to a building off Slide Road, with a cross that had been placed with such earnest precision that you could see the tape measure marks in the landscaping. People sang songs about love that sounded like songs about promises you cannot keep. A man with a cheerful beard spoke about a light that cannot be hidden, and I felt my face fold in. I wanted more than anything for someone to tell me that the world had edges and I could watch myself not fall off. After the service, an older man in a plaid shirt shook my hand hard and asked if we were new, and I said yes, and he asked where we lived, and I told him the street, and his face did not change. And yet I knew that he knew. He said he had a truck and could help us move if we needed. I asked him why we would need to move, and he looked at me like a person looks at a dog that knows the word walk and is pretending not to. He said, "Just saying," and squeezed my shoulder, in a way that felt like kindness and instruction both. When we got home, the lights across the street were on, though it was noon. The blinds were down. A fly sat on our window screen and rubbed its legs together with missionary zeal. I took the nightlight from the drawer where I had put it and set it on our mantel and plugged it in as if light could be owed. Jenna sat down and wrote a list without looking. I looked at the space where the girl had stood and saw nothing and felt everything. And if that sounds ridiculous, it is because ridiculous is all we have left when the world plays fair. The last part is not long, because endings are always short. They look long until you are in them. It was a Thursday night. The wind had died. The sky had a new moon you could mistake for a smudge on glass. The house across the street had its lights on. The girl stood at the small square window. The tall figure stood in the hallway. The blocky one stood behind the kitchen, blind with patience, like a chair. The boy was nowhere and everywhere. I stood at our door and did not open it. Jenna stood beside me, and her hand was not in mine, and yet it was. The tick was in the walls and the floor, and in the part of your body where my grandmother said the soul sits. The girl dipped her head once, and then again, and I realized it was not a greeting. It was counting. 1, 2, 3. She turned away. The tall figure raised its hands and pressed them against the blinds. The blocky figure lifted. Something I could not see. The lights brightened, and the night went thin like paper. And for a heartbeat, the blinds opened on all the windows at once. Not fully. Just enough to make a person think I could see something. If only. What I saw was not a room. It was a place where rooms go when they are done being rooms. The spaces were wrong and correct. Angles did not behave. Light made a sound. The hair on my arms stood at honest attention. I had a sense that the house across the street was not a house but a habit. It had worn itself into the world the way a path wears into a field, and now it was deeper than feet could explain. The blinds settled. The light returned to its particular yellow. The door of the house across the street opened, and nothing came out and nothing went in, and the nightlight on our mantel dimmed and then brightened, as if reminded. The tick fell out of step and then found its way again. In the morning, the lights across the street were off. Every window was dull. The sun made the siding uglier than it deserved. I stood at our window for a long time and waited, and no light came on and no silhouette moved, and it was only a house sitting on a lot in a town where the wind is rude. When Jenna woke, I told her, and she came and stood beside me, and we both exhaled like people do when the thing they have been waiting for does not happen. Marla's tomatoes had gone to rot in a little row, forgotten, an apology waiting to be written. I went to the kitchen and made coffee that tasted like nothing. When I walked back into the living room, Jenna was not there. Neither was the couch. The wall where the couch had been was not a wall. It was a set of square panes glowing a steady yellow. I could see the horizontal line of blinds behind them. They were tilted in that same careful way. My breath caught in my throat and stayed. I turned, slow, because fast had been taken from me. The doorway to the hall had become a smaller square of light. The mantel held the nightlight, and it glowed. With pride, a handprint showed briefly in the small square window that had been our hallway. Pressed from the other side, palm inward, fingers together. Thumb on the wrong side, and then it slid down, leaving nothing. The tick settled into the bones of the house like a new pet in an old home. I heard Jenna in the kitchen, which was now a window and not a room, moving in a way that was careful and numbered. I said her name, and she said mine, from somewhere that was not a place I could go. I turned back to the front windows and saw our street beyond them, ordinary and bright, as if seen through a cheap lampshade. The house across the street looked dull and plain, an empty beige box with cold windows. A man in a cap walked his dog past it and did not look up. He paused at my mailbox and frowned at an envelope, as if the return address had spelled his future. He continued. The wind rose. Dust ticked along the curb. A moth battered itself at the edge of my vision. They will tell you that a house is a container. They will tell you that it contains your warm moments and your arguments and your leftovers and your rest. They will not tell you that some houses are not containers at all. They are measures. They count what you bring into them. They count the light. They count the steps to the sink. They count the letters of your name. They count who lives there, and they make a note when the numbers do not match. When it is time for the numbers to match, they arrange themselves and they stand you up where you belong. Across the street, the beige house sits, ordinary, empty to anyone who does not belong to it. In here, the lights glow a steady yellow, and the blinds tilt at the precise angle required to make sense of nothing. I stand at the wide front window and hold my hand up, palm inward, fingers together. And sometimes a tall figure moves in the hallway, and sometimes a boy becomes thin, and sometimes a girl dips her head and begins again at 1. When people drive past, they do not wave. At night, I count the windows. I count them until the numbers agree.